Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar on Energizing Coaching Ourselves, a refresher course. My name is Phil LeNir. I'm president of Coaching Ourselves, and I'll be spending the next about 45 minutes sharing some of the key lessons that we've learned facilitating hundreds of groups using Coaching Ourselves. We're going to share very quickly what is Coaching Ourselves. Then I'll talk about the lessons learned facilitating coaching ourselves. We'll talk a little bit about why we see organizations using coaching ourselves, how it's used, and then some of the lessons that we've learned evaluating coaching ourselves usage in organizations. What is coaching ourselves? Very simply, it's a small group of managers helping one another improve their practice of management through reflection and dialogue. The two words underlined in this phrase are helping and practice. And because a peer coaching group, Coaching Ourselves peer coaching groups, is a place where managers help one another. And that's very important when we think about what we're doing. If we're facilitating this group of managers, we're not helping them directly as facilitators. We're creating the context in which they help one another. And then the other word underlined is practice, because management is a practice. It's not a science or an art. And we're having them help one another improve their practice of management. In essence, we like to see Coaching Ourselves groups as essentially small, highly productive communities of practice. When we're going out there helping an organization set up a Coaching Ourselves group and then we're facilitating it, what we're really doing is we're helping the organization set up a community of practice for the managers in their organization, and then we're giving them a fairly structured but very productive activity that they can do in this community of practice so that they can get better at their practice of management and help their organizations. Logistically speaking, they're 90-minute sessions, 4 to 6 participants, always supported by a facilitator and guided by one of 80 of our Coaching Ourselves modules. Why do Coaching Ourselves, or why do peer coaching groups work? And many of you have heard this from Professor Henry Mintzberg, co-founder of Coaching Ourselves. And of course, it's obvious for, I'd say, everybody. I'm a human being. You're all human beings. Everyone you work with is a human being. None of us are human resources. And organizations, or the best organizations that we see out there, operate as communities of engaged human beings, not collections of detached human resources. So that's the reality. So us as learning and development professionals looking to improve the performance of these organizations or communities of human beings, the type of interventions that we choose and the way we work with our interventions have to be focused on the human beings and have to be focused on all aspects of human beings working together in these communities to produce these products and services. And peer coaching groups is a very human way to help organizations improve. That's a very simplistic way of sort of framing all of this, but we'll take a look as we go a little bit deeper in what we mean by this. In terms of what is Coaching Ourselves, and I'm going to go fairly quickly over all of this since many of you know this, it comes from the work of Professor Henry Mintzberg. Professor Henry Mintzberg is a well-known management and business school thinker who published his first book in 1973. And what was so important about his first book, which was titled The Nature of Managerial Work, is he did an observational study on what managers do in the real world. And though much management theory would say that the manager is organizing, planning, and controlling, the facts say otherwise. Managers don't do a lot of what management theory at the time says they should be doing. Managers basically spend a lot of time running around doing the best they can to keep their heads above water, getting constantly interrupted. It's a very action-oriented and fluid type activity. So when we think about our role as learning and development professionals and we're trying to improve the performance of managers in our organization, we want to start with a deep understanding of what managers actually do and then design our interventions to help managers become better at what they're doing rather than, for example, tell them to do something that they haven't done, they won't do, and doesn't frankly make sense for them to do when you look at the nature of organizations. Henry Mintzberg continued with his work of observational studies on different aspects of organization, and then of course he turned his attention to management education, and he came out along with many other professors with this idea encapsulated in the quote on the page that the best way for us to help managers learn to become better at their practice of management is simply to give them this opportunity to reflect on their own experiences in light of conceptual ideas. Very quickly speaking, we're simply asking managers to think about what they do on a day-to-day basis. So for example, what they did yesterday, what they did the week before. This is the thoughtful reflection on natural experience, and they're doing this in light of conceptual ideas, not learning the conceptual ideas, but seeing their experiences through the lens of different conceptual ideas on management, such as the decision-making process, such as differences between leadership and management, and all these other conceptual ideas. The Coaching Ourselves modules that we have provide the theme for this dialogue and reflection that managers do in these peer coaching groups. And these are written by different authors, and they provide the content, the questions, and the timing so that the facilitator can run an effective 90-minute peer coaching session or community of practice with managers. One of the other key concepts when we're thinking about what is coaching ourselves is it's reflection and dialogue. And reflection and dialogue together lead to learning and change. So we know in many cases a lot of leadership development programs in the past have focused on learning about leadership. But organizations need managers that are better leaders, not more knowledgeable on the subject. And so this process of bringing managers, practicing managers together, they have their experiences, the concepts are in the dialogue, and have them do this reflection and dialogue leads them to want to change their behavior, change some aspect of a business process, change something on their job. They're making an impact. And by doing these 90-minute cycles in an iterative fashion, you end up with this weaving of work and learning together over a period of time. And as we all know, that has far greater impact if you simply calculate the time spent than doing it all at once. So it's very important that it's woven together with work, coaching ourselves interventions to get the type of impact that you're looking for and that you can expect from the effort and the energy that you're expending. That's what coaching ourselves is. I'm going to summarize some of these key elements that we've learned. There's many different elements and sort of aspects of coaching ourselves that we've seen over the past almost 10 years that we've been working with organizations through this, but these are some of the most important ones that we've learned. The group size must be small. I can't emphasize this enough. If you're working with a group of folks doing coaching ourselves, don't let the group size get larger than 6. 5 is particularly ideal. 6 is fine. Any larger than that, and there simply is not enough airtime in 90-minute sessions, for example, to have 8 people have a dialogue. Trust doesn't tend to get established in a group that's larger, and there's many other challenges. Now, that said, we've seen many of our partners do variations. So for example, they might work with cohort sizes of 12 and they split them up into 3 groups of 4 while they're doing the session. So there's many ways to work with larger sizes without being sort of inhibited by this number. But the dialogue sessions must always be in small groups. Someone's always facilitating in a coaching ourselves session. This is something that we've learned over time. I personally started off working with coaching ourselves, and I had this belief that anyone could facilitate, and I still think anyone can facilitate with the right training and support and supervision is what I've learned over time. And there must be somebody who's taking an active role facilitating the group. Sure, they can also be a participant in some cases, but it's an explicit role and it must happen and it must be done by somebody. In most groups, you don't want more than one level of difference in the hierarchy. Actually, I'd say in all groups, you don't want more than one level of difference in the hierarchy. And this relates partially because in many organizations, more than one level of difference in the hierarchy leads to challenges in people actually trusting each other and thus being honest in their dialogue and thus not talking about what's really going on and not being able to truly help each other. This also, even in organizations where people really do trust and can get down to the very human level and the sort of roles are diminished and it's just people working together, large differences in the hierarchy mean people are frankly living in different very different contexts. And so the type of dialogue and reflection that they have is not necessarily that helpful for one another. So that's another good reason to keep it together. There must be regular sessions. Coaching Ourselves works, as you saw before, in this weaving of working and learning one after the other. Always make sure that your sessions are weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. Any longer than monthly sessions will give you a certain benefit, but you won't have the benefit of the weaving together because they will frankly be independent events. So for example, some organizations for logistical reasons can only do a once per quarter session, and that becomes an independent event. That's not a weaving together. Always have the same participants in each session. That's because the benefits of the trust and the relationship building accumulate, of course, when you have the same participants. And we see in many cases some of the most impactful dialogue and changes in the participants happen only after the third or the fourth session because of that trust and honesty that's built. The last one, and this is something that admittedly when I started Coaching Ourselves 10 years ago, I wasn't aware of how important this is. There always has to be a beginning and an end. If you're going to run a program, I think of any kind of a program, it must have a defined beginning. Of course, it must be related to a reason why you're doing it, and organization must need it at that point in time for the folks to learn and change in this way. And then there must be an end, celebration, accomplishment. You can repeat the program the next year, but it's always a program and always a beginning and an end. In terms of facilitation, and I'm going to go in a little bit, I'm going to go actually in a fair bit more detail in a bit. One of the biggest lessons that we've learned really in the past 2 years of working with many Coaching Ourselves groups is keep the timing. If you're facilitating a session, you've got a group of 4 to 6 managers who've given you their time so that you can move them forward, their thinking, their perspectives, get them to come up with some new conclusions to change, to improve their organization, their performance, something. You want to work with them, you want to be firm, you want to keep things moving along, and one of the best ways to do that is to simply keep the timing that's written on each page in the Coaching Ourselves modules. Remember, the modules are about 10 to 15 pages. Each page has a timing, giving you sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes to talk, do some exercise, and move things through. You're going to listen. You're going to not talk while they're doing it. You're going to support them if they need it. But when the timing is up, you're likely going to have to cut someone off, and you're going to move forward. They may be annoyed at you, but they will respect you. And at the end of the day, after the end of 90 minutes, they're going to accomplish something that's going to be productive and useful for them. So that's one of the key lessons that we've had with facilitating Coaching Ourselves recently. Some of the other broader lessons that we've seen in Coaching Ourselves in the past couple of months is this idea of sustaining and supporting peer coaching groups. So first, obviously you're not going to simply, or obviously it wasn't obvious to us at first, but it is now, you can't simply start it off and assume that it's going to go. It's not. There has to be some support at a high level, and this goes with all programs. Senior leadership must support it. There must be a sponsor of some sort, and of course, it's aligned with the organizational goals. Otherwise, well, it's not gonna last long. There must be a beginning and an end, and the facilitators need some sort of support. I use the term now coaching supervision. We'll take a look at how the ICF defines that, and we've adapted that within the Coaching Ourselves model. But whoever's playing the role of facilitating these groups, peer coaching groups, they need some support, and it's regular support on an ongoing basis so that they can get better at doing their job of helping the peer coaching groups get the most out of the activity that they're engaged in. Coaching Ourselves, as many of you already know, can be used as a standalone program, in which case you would typically test it in the organization, pilot it, and then launch. And a standalone program could be 6 to 20 sessions. Each session, as we know, is 90 minutes of 4 to 6 participants, and the modules are selected against the needs of the participants vis-a-vis the organization and what you're trying to achieve. One of the key lessons that we've learned as we've been working more and more in this domain with peer coaching groups is the learning and development people in the organization must get really good at marketing, communications, and project management. And these aren't perhaps classic skills of the learning and development folks, but these are skills that we have to learn, we have to master, And these are skills, I think, we were talking with Charles Jennings yesterday about this, and he reiterated this under the context of the 70-20-10 framework. This is what we as L&D professionals need to get good at so that we can achieve our goals of improving the performance in the organization. I'll give you one simple example, and it took me a long time. I mean, we know this at an intellectual level, but to do it, it's not obvious. When a group is running, and if you're facilitating, ask the group if you can take a picture on your camera phone when it's done. And that picture can then be used in an internal web page with maybe a little testimonial that you have from somebody. It's such a simple activity, and frankly, it's so natural for many of the younger generation that we forget that this doesn't have to be a large, complicated thing. This has to just be a type of activity that maybe we're not used to doing, but we need to now do so that we can continue to support the marketing and communications of the value that we offer to the folks in the organization. The other aspect of coaching ourselves is, in many cases, it can be used embedded inside of a program. And I know many of you who are listening to the webinar today, and I know many of you are embedding coaching ourselves as part of the other offerings that you're either offering through to the market, or if you're a professional in an organization, through to your organization. So what we've seen is you can think of coaching ourselves as a 90-minute peer coaching group activity that you do during, let's say, a typical classroom event as a workshop. You can have managers do this in between typical classroom events, and of course, typically under the theme of an alumni program or alumni offering, you can have alumni do a series of modules on their own time after the classroom event or program is done. And participants in your programs can either do it in their intact teams, or it can be something that they need to do with their leadership team, quote unquote, back in the office. And of course, one of the use cases that we see very frequently now with coaching ourselves is to use coaching ourselves as a L&D activity during a management offsite, or an all-day leaders forum, or one of these classic sort of one-day gatherings that organizations have to bring managers and leaders together. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of these lessons of facilitating. So what's really important, and this is, as we know, there's a lot of things that you'll need to do as a facilitator. What we've had trouble in the past doing is teasing out what's really important and what's important but not as important as those things that are really important. Some of the pitfalls that we see with folks that are facilitating the first time in coaching ourselves, and this idea of coaching supervision. What's really important about facilitating coaching ourselves? Well, there must be a facilitator. It can be a participant that's been trained in some way to be the facilitator. The facilitator can also play the role of a participant and a facilitator. As many of you know, that's difficult to do both, but in some cases it's important in the organization. Following the timing. I can't stress that enough, and I say that over and over and over again now, and every time I can help groups follow that timing, they get so much more out of the process than if I'm a bit more loose on the timing. Now, I'm going to say something that's a little contradictory to follow the timing. Following the timing has a lot of value at the very beginning of a coaching ourselves group. In other words, the first session or the second session. By the time you get to the fourth or the fifth session, following the timing is not that important because the group is already naturally following the timing. In other words, they've learned how to learn. They've become efficient and effective at sharing honestly what they're thinking and where they need help, and working it out together. So following the timing becomes, as you become more experienced as a facilitator and you see the groups gelling, you learn to relax. But at the beginning, following the timing is simple and highly effective to get the most value out of this for the participants that you're working with. There's this other aspect about facilitating coaching ourselves that we've learned. The facilitator's in charge of the process. You have a module, there's some content, there's some questions, you have a group of people. but you as the facilitator are in charge. So you're there to leverage the content and the questions and all the context to help people get the most out of it. And what does that mean practically? Sometimes you may choose to tell the group, don't use that question because you know that it's not going to be relevant for the group. In some cases, you'll see a question on one of the pages in a Coaching Ourselves module, and you're going to add color to it so that they can have a more directed dialogue and reflection around a theme or a subject that you know will be valuable to them to achieve what they're trying to achieve through the time that they're giving you. Listening. Coaching Ourselves facilitators literally need to spend 90 to 95% of their time not saying anything and listening. And what you get out of listening, as all of you know, you start to get a good idea of what's happening in the group and the dynamics. You learn immense amounts of information and knowledge about the organization in terms of the challenges that people are having, the way that they're seeing the world, and that allows the little interventions that you do make to be far more effective and valuable to the group. I'm going to add one more point here, which I didn't write on the slide, and I just realized it again, and it's such a simple thing, but it makes such a big difference. Participants should not talk to you when you're the facilitator. Participants need to talk to each other. Every single time we start with a new Coaching Ourselves group and we give them the module and somebody reads the page and they start answering the question, they talk to me as a facilitator if I'm facilitating it. And I just need to say, don't talk to me, talk to each other. And then they might come back to it again and again out of habit, and every time I'll just say, talk to each other, don't talk to me. Again, once they get that, then it becomes far more valuable for them, because this is a process by which managers are helping each other, not me as the facilitator being the center of it and helping them. The last one is the question that you'll see at the end of every single Coaching Ourselves module in the conclusion section. This is the last 5 minutes of the session you have, and it's to get the participants to simply think and answer this pretty important question: was this a valuable way to spend your time, and why? We want the participants to do the evaluation for themselves and ultimately to be able to tell their stakeholders, I spent 90 minutes on this activity, this is why it's going to help us achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve in our group or our team or something like that. Classic pitfalls. Many of you know this. You're not the teacher, you're the facilitator. We've seen facilitators that fall into the teacher type mode, in other words, helping people summarize what it is they've learned, these sorts of things. Don't take notes as a facilitator. People take their own notes. Do not be responsible for evaluation. The facilitator is responsible for helping people evaluate the activity and the value for them, but not to do it for them. Definitely you have to help them, don't get me wrong, but you're not doing it for them. I reiterate this, do not fail to cut people off. It's hard. It's very hard in many cases, but one of the biggest values that I've seen facilitators offers to groups is to just cut people off. And you know, I'm not saying rudely or anything like that, but sorry, time's up. Let's go to the next page. Could you please start talking to a new person? It's as simple as that. It's very valuable for the group. Make sure the participants take turns reading aloud. Let the participants make mistakes, but keep the timing. In other words, if they maybe don't answer the questions perfectly, that's fine in many cases. In some cases it isn't, and since you're listening, you know which ones are important and not. But in some cases, that's all right. This last one, and this is something that I feel personally about, treat your participants like adults. And what I mean by that is, if somebody comes and says they aren't ready to talk because they didn't have time to prepare, too bad. You were given the module ahead of time. You were told you could prepare if you wanted to, if you needed to, and then you come in and you didn't. We're not going to stop to, you know, get this all going. Everybody's an adult. Everybody's a manager. Do what you have to do, and we're going to move forward. So very important for me that, you know, you're dealing with managers. They can take notes. They can deal with their own action items. They can follow up on these things. We can help them do this, but we're not doing any of this for them. The last piece about facilitating Coaching Ourselves that we're now doing far more of and learning about the value of this is this concept of coaching supervision. Now, coaching supervision, this is a quote directly from the ICF, International Coach Federation website. And they define coaching ourselves as when a coach periodically brings his or her coaching work experiences to a quote-unquote coaching supervisor, and then they engage in reflective dialogue and collaborative learning so that the coach can get better at doing what he or she has to do as a coach for the benefit of his clients. So this same concept applies to facilitators of Coaching Ourselves groups. And the way that we're applying this out in the field with people who are using Coaching Ourselves groups is we're simply saying that let's say you have 4 or 5 facilitators in an organization, then they need to get together typically after the first session that they've all done, then after maybe the third or the fourth, for usually a half-hour to 1-hour call with you as the coaching supervisor, being the expert of Coaching Ourselves, and you help them learn from each other. It's a simple process. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it has a huge benefit in terms of these facilitators become better quicker, and it's like a glue that makes increases the impact of Coaching Ourselves significantly. So I'm going to take a pause here. If anyone has any questions about some of these latest lessons that we've had from learning about Coaching Ourselves, I encourage you to ask a question at this point in time. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to continue sharing some of the aspects of why Coaching Ourselves isn't used in organizations, and then of course how it's used, and these are broader questions of design. But really I won't be discussing much more about the role of the facilitator and facilitating Coaching Ourselves groups at this point in time. So I'm going to continue. What I've tried to do here for you is to summarize what we see going out in the field through our partners, through the direct customers that we work with, in terms of why are organizations choosing to use this approach, peer coaching groups, to help themselves do some of the L&D or the change work that they need done to improve their organizations. Roughly speaking, we see 5 categories. Why? They're doing it for leadership development. Why? They're doing it because they need to change. They're doing it because they need to build community. Sometimes they're looking for a way to enhance a larger existing program that they have or that they're developing. And again, as I said, more and more we're seeing folks that are doing it because they need to do an L&D activity during a leadership offsite forum and event. I'll go into these in a bit more detail and to explain the motivations that we're seeing people or organizations have for using peer coaching groups. So for leadership development, why? Why do we use peer coaching groups for leadership development? Because it changes behavior and that improves performance. It's very simple. Getting folks together to help one another improve their practice of management changes what people do after even one session. They go out there and they take some action that's a bit different, that's new, that's changing something to improve performance. So when we do a peer coaching group, we really see this as all the folks in the group after this 90-minute session will make one small little decision to change something. And then everybody making a small decision to change one little thing on an ongoing basis results in larger and broader changes in the organization. The key motivations to use peer coaching groups, aside from this obvious one of changing behavior, it's convenient, the 90-minute sessions. The idea of the 1- and 2-day workshops are becoming less and less convenient for more and more people, and the 90-minute sessions is far more convenient. Of course, it's flexible. This can be done on a conference call, video call, GoToMeeting, or in person. More and more, we see organizations that want the managers to learn from each other. Social learning. There's still a need for expert content, which Coaching Ourselves has, or you can bring in experts, but more and more there's this need for social learning, and it's seen as valued. And folks are looking for developing the capacity for self-development, not just developing and learning the new ideas and becoming better, but learning how to learn on their own. And of course, a peer coaching group, eventually peer coaching groups do become independent. Coaching Ourselves, of course, we have a large selection of modules, and we're constantly updating and growing our module catalog. And it's a coaching focus, which more and more is being recognized by organizations as crucial for the performance gains that they're expecting and the direct benefits that they're looking for from leadership development activities. For change, a number of partners that use Coaching Ourselves as part of a larger change offering. And why is Coaching Ourselves so useful in a change process? Because it's an iterative, emergent process, 90-minute sessions on a monthly basis. The modules don't even have to be fixed. They can be chosen month for month as we learn and as we change. And it's based on reflection and dialogue. And that is the underlying sort of how do you change aspects of an organization. Not in all cases, but in some cases, this is the critical aspect of changing organizations. Of course, the same as for leadership. It's convenient, it's flexible, learning from each other, developing the capacity for self-development. The other aspects about Coaching Ourselves that are particularly valuable in a change program comes from the approach itself. When you get the group of folks together for these 90-minute sessions on an ongoing basis, it builds relationships and trust. This is key for change. This increases engagement and alignment. And of course, the process itself develops a culture of coaching, mentoring, and learning, and it creates this space for networking and sharing, all of which is crucial for success in many types of change programs. Building community. There's some organizations that are looking to build or rebuild a sense of community in their organizations. And of course, Coaching Ourselves, the process of getting together and helping one another as managers and organization creates an engaged and caring management. And these are the seeds of what we see as community in organizations. Of course, it's building the relationship and trust. It's an iterative and emergent process. Building community is really just a change program of some sort. But ultimately, the process creates that engaged and caring management, which results in community. Many folks will use Coaching Ourselves to enhance an existing program or program that they're developing. Why? Because peer coaching groups are an easy way to solve classic challenges that we see in the design of leadership or learning and development programs. Coaching Ourselves can help in a very big way solve the transfer of learning problem by simply give participants in the small groups an opportunity to take the expert content that they may have gotten from the experts or the trainers in the program and work in a structured way to figure out what they're going to do with it in a very realistic and simple type takeaway action item. It creates a way for participants to learn from each other, which classic programs are looking for. It's highly interactive and highly engaging. It's very simple, interactive, 90 minutes, get people together, they do it on their own. We've seen a number of folks use Coaching Ourselves as a way to give participants a way to leverage the content experts. So for example, there might be a famous speaker that will come in and share some deep knowledge on some subject matter, and then participants will be given 90 minutes with a Coaching Ourselves module related to that. And the combination of those two is far more powerful than simply listening to that content expert and then having, for example, a coffee break and expecting the dialogue during the coffee break to be highly productive. It's useful, but Coaching Ourselves is far more productive than that. And of course, it has the content and the questions all together. The last thing that we see in terms of why people are using Coaching Ourselves is to solve the problem of what to do during a leadership offsite or event. Why? Because it's highly engaging, it's interactive, it's short, and it's 100% group dialogue. And that's what people need to do during leadership offsite and events to get the most out of it. In many cases, we'll see organizations use Coaching Ourselves as part of the afternoon activity. We all know that putting a speaker on in an afternoon of a leadership offsite and event is particularly challenging. People are not as awake as they are in the morning, to put it mildly. And Coaching Ourselves module with a bit of a wrapping around it becomes a highly effective 90 minute to 2 hour activity. Of course, people are learning from each other. There's a large selection of modules to select from. Participants develop realistic action items and takeaways, and it creates that space for networking, sharing, and building relationships, which is a big part of why you're holding your leadership offsite in your event, because it's that networking, sharing, and building of relationships that gives the organization the benefit from the time they're spending getting people together from across the organization. It's just that simple. So the last part I'd like to talk about, or second to last, is I'd like to share how Coaching Ourselves is used. And these will be some of the steps that we see folks using, getting started with Coaching Ourselves, and then using it for the different reasons why they want to use it. We see people first testing and piloting. In many cases, peer coaching groups is new. L&D teams want to test, pilot, and educate themselves on how they can leverage this concept in their organization. Of course, peer coaching groups program, very simple type program, a use of Coaching Ourselves to solve specific problems, enhancing the program, replacing a typical one-day leadership workshop. We see that more often now. Large-scale Coaching Ourselves programs, and of course, how it's used during a leadership offsite and event. Testing and piloting. In many cases, the L&D team simply wants to learn about and assess the use of peer coaching groups for leadership development. We've put a package together. We call it a starter package. It's a low-cost way for an L&D team to be able to accomplish this goal. L&D team members will get certified. That's always in person or an online activity split over several segments. Then they use the modules that come with the starter package, the licenses, and the knowledge that they gain from the certification to test and pilot. And finally, they assess the impact and decide on next steps. Simple, low cost. It gives the L&D team a chance to essentially get their feet wet, and then there'll be a whole bunch of new ideas and a deeper understanding on how to integrate and use this to solve the goals. Peer coaching groups. A group of leaders needs to develop competencies, needs to improve teamwork, solve leadership problems, these sorts of things. Coaching Ourselves or our partners can offer a program to do this. The partner or us can facilitate it, or the L&D team can get certified to facilitate themselves. You select the modules, you run your test session always with the leadership group. They agree it's useful, and then you run one session per month for 4 to 6 months. That's very simple. That's the program. Assessing the impact is dialogue. Was this useful? Why was it useful? Capture that information, and of course have them discuss with their stakeholders on why this was useful and how it helped them achieve their goals. As part of a larger program, as we mentioned before, you're looking, L&D or change initiative requires some of the benefits that you get from Coaching Ourselves. Again, typically the L&D team will get certified, or the partner is there to work with them. You're running a test session just to get some experience, and then a lot of the work comes in the co-design. Where's it going to go? How's it going to work? These sorts of things. And then, of course, you're running your sessions and supervising. We see now this idea of replacing a 1 to 2 day workshop. Still, some organizations are looking for, let's say, a 1 day workshop on running more effective meetings, or these sorts of typical soft skills competency development requests. Coaching Ourselves can be used to replace that. Typically, select a series of modules. You'll run not in a 1 day workshop. You might do 2 half-day workshops depending on the logistics, or multiple 90-minute sessions, and you simply follow through by getting modules that are mapped to those needs. For Coaching Ourselves partners, internal and external, we've been collecting more and more of these mappings, and we're cataloging them on the internal partner website. This is the new partner website. Some of you are already on this, and those who aren't, you will shortly be moved over to our new partner website, which has a lot more information on how to use peer coaching groups to solve problems in organizations. Large-scale Coaching Ourselves programs are happening on, again, it's obviously it's harder to have to start a large-scale program of any sort, but when it happens, the impacts are very significant. So if you're looking to implement a significant culture change, or you want a program that has a direct impact on a key KPI like the profitability of the organization, then you should consider using Coaching Ourselves or peer coaching groups in a very large-scale way. Obviously, there's a co-design, and it's, as we all know, it's sophisticated and deep. We see these organizations select a large number of participating managers to be trained up as facilitators. So in Denmark, where this started in a very large way, we see them training, our partner in Denmark will go to public sector organizations, will train up upwards of 50 managers to be facilitators during a 3-day training program. The managers are not only being trained how to facilitate coaching ourselves, but most important, they are being trained to be the agents of change, and the organization has a way of framing what they're trying to do in their organization from a cultural perspective. And then the program is really a multi-year systematic commitment to change. We see organizations will run a first cohort with 5 to 10%. If you have 50 facilitators, you can have 250 participants running Coaching Ourselves groups for 6 to 12 months. Then some of those graduates will become the participants, the facilitators for the next group. So it can be done. But we'll get organizations that will say, well, we'd like to impact profitability and we've got a small budget. It's not going to happen if you're a big organization. So obviously you want realistic expectations. But with the investment, Coaching Ourselves, peer coaching groups impacts key KPIs. And I'll show you some of the proof in a couple of slides. I'm going to take one more slide, the offsite events, and then I'm going to answer 2 or 3 of the questions that have popped up. So this is the last reason on the last slide on how Coaching Ourselves is used. As I mentioned, for offsite events is more and more Coaching Ourselves is being used for that. Stakeholders are searching for an interactive learning and development activity for their leadership offsite or event, or we're simply looking as a independent coach or consultant to run a workshop during a conference rather than just do a talk. And so Coaching Ourselves is a fantastic activity that can be done very easy. Obviously, we're looking at selecting a module that maps with the theme of the workshop and developing a wrapping. These are, the introduction, maybe some warm-up exercise, and then a plenary after or around the Coaching Ourselves session that will anchor this with the theme of the workshop. And these events, we've seen them timed anywhere from 60 to 2.5 hours, 60 minutes to 2.5 hours. So there's a great deal of flexibility in terms of how this is used. And we've got lots and lots and lots of examples of folks doing this for offsite events now. It's very popular. I'm going to take a quick look at the questions and just answer some of these questions for folks. So let me just do this. So we have Michael is asking one question. Michael Garrity asks, I had not pre-released the material to the group. Is this the recommended approach for a session? So the question here is, when you're doing a 90-minute peer coaching session with a group of leaders, you've selected a module with perhaps the stakeholder or the senior leader in the group, and then the question is, should we give that module, which is just a PDF file, to the participants before the session or not? In our experience, yes, you should just attach the PDF file, which is the module, to the meeting invite, let's say, as a way for distribution, and give participants the instructions that if they want, they can read and prepare. If they don't have time, or they can't, or they don't want to, they don't have to do that. The reason for this is because different learning styles. Some people are more comfortable if they have a chance to prepare, and some people don't want to prepare and won't make time to prepare. So by releasing it ahead of time, you cover all your bases. The most important thing is you don't want folks coming to the session and saying, sorry, I'm not ready to talk because I didn't have time to prepare. That's not unacceptable. You've got it, do what you have to do, and we're going to have a very productive 90-minute session. I want to mention, in the past, so 3-4 years ago, we used to say, no, we don't want to release the material ahead of time because we want people to discover it all together. And you'd still like that to happen, but we found that that was outweighed by folks who were not comfortable because they didn't have the opportunity to prepare. So we've taken to the habit of releasing it ahead of time. Another question, Danielle Blanchette, is in a role-playing exercise, it's hard to help if you're facilitating 2 or 3 groups simultaneously. So the context here is, let's say you're a facilitator and you have a large room of 50 people during an off-site event. So you divide them up into 10 tables of 5, and the module that you've selected has these groups run a role play as one of the exercises. It is impossible for you as a single host, I'm going to call you, to help all these 10 tables simultaneously with the role play. It's not going to happen. You're going to be able to sit with one table during that 10-minute role play and help them. What we do during these situations is, once again, we just tell the facilitators, the table facilitators, follow the timing no matter what. And then number 2, just follow the instructions. Maybe 50, 60% do it exactly as written. The other 40%, they do part of what's written during the role play because it is complicated and it is hard. They still have a very useful experience in that little segment. And so long as they follow the time, they keep moving. And it works. It's valuable for them either way. So it's not crucial that they follow it perfectly as written every time. In fact, it's not possible. Yeah, Irene Caron asks, how do you launch with a kickoff that doesn't cover one of the modules? That's a good question, Irene. I don't have an obvious answer. We've launched it. I don't know. I'm going to answer the question like that. I just don't know how you do that. Let me think about that and we can talk offline. That's a good question. And I believe that's it for the questions. So I'm going to talk another 5-10 minutes about the last 2 or 3 items that I have to share with you today. Once again, please continue to ask questions and I'll get to them at the end. We have about 10-12 minutes left. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is this idea of evaluating results. With coaching ourselves, one of the key lessons that we've learned more and more is that our role as the facilitator is to help participants evaluate the results for themselves, at least at the group level. So I want to talk about individual level, group level, and then organizational level. For the individual level and the group level, the role of the facilitator is to help make sure people can do that for themselves. So, they need to be responsible for proving that this is helping them achieve their goals. They need to be able to talk to their stakeholders, their bosses, after the session and say, I just did this 90-minute session and it was useful for me to help me participate, in the project or the goals we're trying to do. All that kind of stuff is something that us as a facilitator needs to help them talk about. And that last question in every module, was this a useful way to spend your time? Why? Is the catalyst for having that dialogue and helping them do this for themselves and think through. Now you're going to run into a lot of classic pitfalls. We've seen groups where the facilitators, I'll talk to them after and they'll say, yeah, it was, the group went through the session and they decided to change some small business process or have another meeting, and they did it, and I came to the next session and they talked about what they did and how useful it was, but then they said that the coaching ourselves wasn't really very useful because they didn't learn anything. And so you'll have that sort of issue where people will equate learning with content, whereas you're helping them improve performance. And that's really what you're looking to do, and that's what you want them to think about when they're evaluating the impact of what they're doing with coaching ourselves. In terms of capturing this data and then, let's say, integrating it so that you can talk about the organizational benefits, we've done this in terms of, getting people to fill in a survey and capturing a lot of data and then doing a fair amount of work on the back end to create reports and these kind of things. We do not have a systematic or scientific way to do that at this time, or we haven't stumbled upon one yet. We do capture it, we do write reports and do these kind of things, and there's a lot of discussion that goes on around presenting the reports and these sorts of things. But ultimately, when you talk about organizational benefits, what we always try to do after we've done a certain number of coaching ourselves or peer group coaching sessions in an organization is we're going to have, either us or the L&D folk, a discussion with the more senior level stakeholders. And we're going to ask them very simply, do you notice any difference? And if they say, yeah, nothing's changed, it's not working. For whatever reason, we're working with these groups and the changes that they're making are having an impact that's noticeable to the senior folks in the organization who will be focused on those KPIs and what's important for their business. And so that is important, that that type of a connection happens, and that helps us as facilitators focus on what we're trying to do. So that is the way that at the moment, and admittedly it's not scientific, that we'll assess the organizational impact. If the senior leaders aren't seeing any difference and say, no, nothing's changed, then you want to think about how you're facilitating, what modules you're picking, who's in the group, all those kind of things. But ultimately, that kind of visibility, it should go up. Otherwise, you're not changing things. The last thing that we see, use existing KPIs, in other words, profitability or, customer response metrics and these kind of things, only when you're doing a large-scale intervention. And I think this goes with everything. So I'm going to leave with that last picture. I know some of you have seen the way Fujitsu has decided to measure the impact of Coaching Ourselves' impact on their profitability KPI. They're about 1,200 employees, 200 million revenue. What they did is they launched a Coaching Ourselves program, a multi-year program. It's typically 20 sessions a year with cohorts of 12. It started off with one cohort and then spread throughout most of the organization. Started in around 2010, 2011, and it grew. And you can see the profitability in the red line went from an average of about 5% to 8%. So that's correlation, not causation, as you know. But the next slide shows what they did is they mapped the attendance rate to the Coaching Ourselves sessions against the profitability per department level, and they showed, again, a strong correlation, which now points to causation, maybe not 100% guaranteed, but very close. Those departments that spend more time, the managers in those departments that spend the time working through the Coaching Ourselves sessions on a regular basis had a higher profitability. I always think of this as kind of obvious. We're telling managers in the organization to get together on a regular basis and work to improve their organization, and the senior leadership is telling them that profitability is crucial. They eventually figure it out. So to finish off, and then I'll get to the last one or two questions that I've seen. Getting started with Coaching Ourselves for L&D organizations, you can take a starter package to help educate, pilot, and test. You can do a program package, and these are the modules plus the support that you need to achieve these goals, or an enterprise package. Independent coaches and consultants will certify you and will help you so that you can start to offer these sorts of packages and the modules to your clients in your programs. And of course, the additional benefits is we have a growing global network of practitioners. We have these community of practice webinars and events where we're learning and getting better at what we're doing in terms of helping organizations with peer coaching groups. There's global conferences. We have one next week in Tokyo with our Japanese partner. And we publish a quarterly guide on best practices and improving peer coaching groups, or the impact of peer coaching groups. So I'm going to answer a last question that just came through. So Gabriella asks, how can you differentiate Coaching Ourselves with group coaching? Very good question, Gabriella. I would typically say that Coaching Ourselves and group coaching are very, very similar and have the same underlying principles in terms of learning through reflection and dialogue. Coaching Ourselves has the content, which structures each session and gives people a lens through which they can see their experiences and move things forward. I know that's not perhaps the cleanest answer possible. I will typically say Coaching Ourselves is group coaching, but with the modules. And that's enough for us to pilot it and then start to expand on it. I suspect there's many other differences. I'd like to also add, in some cases, you'll see Coaching Ourselves be compared to, here in Quebec, we have co-development, action learning in the UK. Again, very, very similar. Conceptually, We're asking people to learn through reflection on experiences. Coaching ourselves adds the bit in light of conceptual ideas. And in many cases, coaching ourselves adds this bit of people helping each other. I'd like to add, why coaching ourselves? Where does coaching coming into all of this? Very simple. We're not asking people in the group to tell each other what to do and what not to do, and we're not necessarily asking them to learn completely on their own. We're asking them to help each other. And what happens in coaching ourselves is it starts, you follow the timing, you read the page, you do the exercise. As the groups warm up, get more fluid, and the facilitator learns to not say a lot so that groups can get to that stage, participants start to help each other by asking one another questions that gets them to figure it out for themselves. So people are essentially coaching each other. I'm coaching, not me as the facilitator, but me as a participant, are coaching my fellow participants by asking my fellow participants questions so that they can mull it over, so that they can think through why something happened, why they did something, and why that caused this kind of a result with their team members or with their projects or these kind of things. And that, to a large degree, is more and more the way that we see coaching ourselves, and what us as a facilitator are trying to do is simply create this context where people are coaching each other. Are there any other questions from anybody? Well, you can always write me an email at any time or just give me a call, and I look forward to being there to help you out. I'm going to point out, you can see this last slide. There are a couple of events that we have coming up. Obviously, if you can come to Tokyo next week, that would be brilliant. If you can't, I understand. We have a webinar coming up. It's our first webinar where we're going to have 5 HR professionals from different organizations who are using Coaching Ourselves. These are folks who are L&D professionals in organizations who use Coaching Ourselves, and we're going to do a power sharing activity, which is like small TED Talks. So each L&D professional, we have L&D managers from all sorts of organizations coming, will say this is why they're using Coaching Ourselves, this is how they're using it, this is the results they've had, and then we'll go to the next one. It's going to be a great way for anybody to learn very quickly, very efficiently on why some organizations are using it and what they see. We have a breakfast session here in Montreal. And we keep putting on new webinars and new events so that folks that are interested in engaging with peer coaching groups for their clients internally, externally, have a place. So thank you all very much for your time today. I hope you have a good rest of the day and the rest of the week, and I look forward to hearing from all of you at some point in the future. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Goodbye.